Hi, everyone. I'm Charina Garcia. I want to welcome everyone to our Chatting with Charlie, our June 2025 Live Visa Bulletin webinar. I'm the Strategy and Innovation Partner here at WR Immigration, and I'm going to be continuing to moderate our sessions with Charlie Oppenheim, who is with our Government Affairs. And if you haven't met Charlie before, you can catch up with him on our LinkedIn and see our webinars and our live predictions of the Visa Bulletin that we've been doing for over a year and a half now. Hi, Charlie.
Hi, it's great to be with everybody today.
So, this webinar today, we're really going to focus on what's top of mind, which is really about now that we're in the Trump administration, a lot of people are wondering, how are the green cards being impacted? Is the Visa Bulletin going to continue to move forward and progress? And what trends can global mobility leaders be looking at? So, we're glad to have Charlie here. And for the next hour, we're going to go ahead and walk through the Visa Bulletin and talk about some of these important things. As I mentioned, Charlie's going to go through some prediction and trends. We'll run through the June Visa Bulletin and a summary, and then we'll do a common case profile for HR discussion, and then we'll do a Q&A. So let's take it away and let's talk about the first question that's top of mind. So, Charlie, what's driving or stalling the Visa Bulletin movement?
Well, at this point in the year, the State Department is having to make adjustments to the dates. And basically, this comes down to if their previous estimates on moving the dates have proved to result in number use being too low, then they will need to be advancing the final action dates. If their previous estimates on number use based on the movement of the dates have been too high and have been using too many numbers, they would either limit or hold the final action dates to avoid exceeding the annual limits. And if we see that they're holding the dates for a period of time, that may indicate the possibility of future corrective action being required.
And just so everyone understands, we're closer to the tail end of the fiscal year, right? Because the fiscal year will end on September 30th. And now today is May 28th, almost June. There's only a few more months that's going to be left in the Visa Bulletin. So I think that's really what's going to be driving or stalling the Visa Bulletin movement for the next few months.
Right. And the one of the requirements is to use basically about 81% of the numbers through June, leaving only 19% of the numbers for the July through September. So that's another reason why dates are likely to be slowing during the summer months.
Okay. And if we go to our next slide, and why don't you walk us through so we could kind of see what number usage has been for the past 10 years?
Yeah, this is just a reflection. You'll see during the 2016 through 2019, the annual limits were basically where they should be on any given year. Earlier in the year, we had questions from people asking, okay, what is the Trump administration going to, will that negatively impact number use in the employment categories? And if you look at this, during his first administration, 2017 through 2020, basically all of the numbers under the annual limit were used with the exception of fiscal 2020. And the only reason that there was a shortage of number use in that year was because of the impact of COVID. So again, things can change, but based on the historical pattern during his first term, there was no negative impact on employment-based number use versus the annual limits.
And so if we're looking at his first term and then we're looking currently, the actual limits are pretty close, right? Because for fiscal year 2025, 150, and then 145 for fiscal year 2026. And then, of course, we don't know the actual number used because they're not publishing the data, correct?
Correct. Unfortunately, the State Department seems to have adopted a policy of not releasing any fiscal 2024 data or any other basically usable data. They typically would post the National Visa Center waiting list as of November 1st of 2024. That has not been published. And again, on these limits, people may notice that for fiscal 21 through 23, those were all-time high annual limits. So There was greater movement in the final action dates during that time, but those were artificially high limits because any unused family sponsored numbers from the previous year are added to the current year's employment limit. And then during the COVID times, very few of the family sponsored numbers were being used. So it inflated the employment limits. Starting with fiscal 2024, the numbers started trending down back to where they should be. And we think that for fiscal 2026 onward, the limit should be in the 140 to 150 range.
Yeah, and I think what's important that listeners understand is, like Charlie said, for fiscal year 2021, the normal limit for employment base is 140,000. And so there are about almost 50,000 extra that was available, right? In terms of number use, which increased the annual limit. So those numbers are artificially inflated, and we're not going to see that again, right, Charlie? Because
No.
it was just a result of the consulate shutting down, them not being able to process family based green cards, which then, of course, rolled over to the employment base. So the folks who really benefited during 21 to 23 is really the folks who were here in the US and were filing adjustment of status, right?
Yes.
So just so you know, these were just artificial. So now for the next coming years, it's going to look the same as what we've seen before. And so this slide just shows you the different preference categories. And again, the fiscal years 2016 to 2026. And you can see the breakdown. So Charlie, you want to explain this chart?
Yeah, again, the employment first, second, and third preference categories, they each receive 28.6% of the overall annual limit. So for the current fiscal year, the limit in the first, second, and third is 42,900. You will see with the reduced limit next year, that figure will be dropped by about 1,500 numbers down to 41,470. And you will also see at the bottom the per country limits. So you can see the downward trend. I say downward from the high years, but we're back basically tracking back to the normal range for the EB1, 2, 3, and per country limits. And these will require slower movement in the employment category final action dates.
Yeah. And if we go to the next slide, this specifically shows you China number use, right? So any comments you have on this, Charlie? This also from 2016 to current 2025.
Right, and in here you will see we're doing the downward trend. I would say whenever they finally publish the 2024 statistics, I would say that for China, the first preference will probably be in the 5,500 to 6,500 range. The EB2 will probably be approximately 5,800 numbers. EB3 will probably be about 3,800 numbers. So things are going down, and again, we will be down to basically the per country limits going forward. This is particularly important for both the China and India second and third preference categories. There may be some fall down of unused numbers from the family preference categories that can be added to those, but by and large, both India and China employment second and third are going to be limited to their per country limits. In this case, for 2025, 3,003 numbers. And this is why we will see very limited movement in those final action dates going forward, unlike previous years during the peak time 21 through 23.
And I think it's important that the listeners also understand that 3,003 is the principal, so it's the employee, but then the families also get deducted from this 3,003. So it's not really 3,003 foreign nationals, it's really 3,003 foreign nationals and their family members.
Yeah, that's a great point. Each applicant counts against the annual limit. And as applicants' wait time, particularly in the third preference, increases, the original principal's family size is likely to be increasing, reducing, using up more numbers.
Yeah, and we can go to the next slide. And then this shows you the India number used. So again, it's still 3,003 as well, because that's the per country preference limit. So any comments you want to make about this slide, Charlie?
Just the main thing is people will look at the fiscal 2022 figures. You will notice for India second, over 59,000 numbers were used. Again, this was artificially high because there was fall down of unused numbers from the first preference category, employment first, into second, and the very high annual limit. And that year, it resulted in extremely rapid movement of the India second preference category, as happened also in China to some extent. And those that were new to the immigration system and looking at things kind of got a jaded idea of how things were going to progress in the future. And they were seeing things move along quickly in 21, 22, and to a little bit lesser extent in 23. And they thought that's the way things always were going to be, and applicants as well. And unfortunately, those, again, I keep stressing, those were artificial times, and we're back to basically normal.
Okay. And if we go to the next slide, this just lays it out in a chart, the employment-based annual limits. So this goes up to fiscal year 2024, and then you can see the artificially inflated numbers for fiscal year 21 to 24.
Yeah, and those orange figures are the range where people could really, hope that the limits are going to be, or not hope, but expect the limits to be. Again, I would say the annual limits in the employment category are going to be somewhere between 140 and to a maximum of 150,000, probably 140 to 145.
So if we add fiscal year 2025 to this, we'll be more along the lines of the orange bar for fiscal year 2019. Okay. Um, and then if we go to our next slide, again, this talks about how are the employment-based per country limit calculated. So Charlie, you kind of want to walk us through this so people can understand where they get these numbers?
Sure. The per country limits are established by the Immigration and Nationality Act, and it that establishes each per country limit is 7% of the overall worldwide limit, and the per country limits were imposed to prevent a handful of countries from potentially monopolizing the vast majority of the visa numbers. And so, if we have a 145,000 annual limit for fiscal 2026, 7% of that equals 10,150. And then of that limit, each of the preference categories is entitled to a percentage of that. So the first, second, and third receive 28.6% of that limit, resulting in 2,903 approximately. And the fourth and fifth get 7.1% of the limit, resulting in 720 numbers. And there is the potential, if for some reason all the numbers in the first preference were not used, they could fall down to second, or any potentially unused fourth and fifth numbers could fall up to the first preference.
Okay. And so basically, it doesn't matter what country, it's based on your country of birth, right? And so
Yes.
if I'm born in India or China, versus someone who's born in, let's just say, Japan or Italy, it's still the same number for that country, right? The per country. But if in Italy and Japan doesn't use up all their numbers, like the is it the 10,150? Where do those go?
Yeah, there's rest of world countries, and then there's the oversubscribed countries in the employment category, which are China, India, Mexico, and the Philippines. If those countries, they will often use up to their 10,150 limit, or potentially, but if there are leftover numbers, say if the annual limit is 10, just 10,000 to round it out, if the rest of world only uses uh, 30,000 numbers, then there would be 10,000 extra numbers, and those numbers could be provided in priority date order to any country that has reached their annual limit. And I know that's a little confusing, but it did basically China and India often benefit by unused numbers under the worldwide annual limit, and that is what has recently allowed the India date to advance very slowly, but use extra numbers because all the rest of world EB1 numbers are not being used.
Yeah, but what you will see when we go to the June Visa Bulletin is there is a backlog for EB2 for rest of world, so we're probably not gonna see any extra numbers
Yes.
dropping over. So let's go to the next slide. And so this is just an example. We were just using China as an example, and you see the 3003 again here. And so Charlie, why don't you walk us through what this chart means?
Yeah, this shows just estimated demand in the first preference, 14,000, almost 500. So that's roughly a minimum of 3 years worth of the annual limit just to get through that demand. The second preference has over 18,000, 6 years to get through that. And the third preference, a little over 13,000, 4.5 years. So this just shows why the China final action dates and the same situation is occurring in India, why the final action dates are moving very slowly in the first, second, and third preference categories because they're the limit versus the amount of demand. The demand far exceeds the per country limit.
But are these numbers accurate though? These numbers that we put here, or are these just kind of estimates?
These were based on numbers, the last information we could get from the Immigration Service and the State Department, but this was back in the fall. These were derived, but unfortunately, they're probably fairly uh, indicative of what the situation is like now. If anything, they may have gotten worse in terms of the amount of demand.
So these are basically I-140 approvals, just counting up how many I-140 approvals we have in people that are waiting in the queue to be called who are born in China. Um, so we can go to the next slide. And so we always get this question. Um, so right now, when you look at the visa bulletin, there are two charts. There's chart A and there's chart B, right? And the chart B dates are not always utilized by the government, by the USCIS. And what you normally see when you look at a chart B is the dates have advanced further, faster, right? And so Charlie, can you explain to our listeners here about the chart B versus the chart A, and why is USCIS not allowing the use of chart B and only allowing the use of chart A?
Sure. This was example was done to show in one of the very good years when the limit was higher, but the immigration service would have looked and said, okay, the overall employment limit is 200,000. And the application filing dates were established. They said based on that, those dates having been established, we know there are 110,000 potential applicants. Then they would look and see, okay, it's January. How many numbers have already been used? October through December, they said 60,000. So they subtract that as well from the 200,000. And the result is there is still 30,000 numbers available. So in this example, the Immigration Service would say, yes, we will allow for the month of January, we will allow the Chart B dates to be used for adjustment of status filing.
Okay, so let's roll back time. And if you've been practicing as long as I have, I remember there was one summer when the visa bulletin, everything became current and there was a mad rush to file adjustment of status applications. So, as you use this chart, can you explain to us what happened? Wow, that must have been what, 15 years ago? I remember the year. You remember
Yeah,
the year because you made the decision to make everything current. So, what year was that?
right. It was announced for the July of 2007 visa bulletin when all of the employment categories were listed as current. And it was a similar calculation to this. And basically, I calculated how many numbers I had left to use July through September, and I compared that with how many numbers had been used and how many numbers then in consultation with the USCIS, how many applicants they had ready to process. And basically, the figure I had at the time, I needed to use approximately 65,000 numbers July through September. And they told me that they only had about 54,000 potential applicants. So since I had far more numbers than there was demand, I made everything current because they said the only way we were going to reach the fiscal 2007 annual limit is if everything was current and they processed everybody they had already in the house, and additional people would file and could be processed July through September, potentially reaching the annual limit.
So that was a crazy time. I remember 2007, and we were in disbelief when we saw all of a sudden all the dates were current. And so what we're saying is Charlie was there at the time and was making those decisions, but that was an aberration as well, right? Um,
Correct.
because basically what Charlie's saying is that he had a certain number of uh, numbers he had to use. And when July rolled around and they talked to USCIS said, we actually have less applications in the queue than the numbers you have to use, Charlie. So what Charlie had to do was figure out how can he get more applicants into the queue so that all the numbers would be used because, you have to use it by September 30th. And so that was a move that they made, which is kind of similar when you see what happened during COVID. They had lots of number use as well. But those are aberrations, and we're not gonna see that again. And usually what you see in the months of July, August, September is really a slowdown and sometimes even an unavailability. So it's not a surprise right now that the USCIS is not accepting Chart B. They will likely not open it, right, Charlie? It's
Yeah,
not that miracle's not gonna happen again in July.
yeah, they
Open it.
immigration immigration will not allow the Chart B dates to be used again until October,
Yeah. So
with the start of the new fiscal year.
yeah, so hold on to all your medicals and all of that. You probably won't be able to file again until October. So we can go to the next slide. And
Okay,
this is your other example, right?
yeah, here's basically the same thing. They're getting ready to announce the February visa bulletin. They do the same type of uh, calculations. They take the annual limit, subtract how much potential demand they had, how many numbers had actually been used, and when they do that, subtract the potential and actual, they have zero numbers left. So they say, okay, we cannot allow applicants to continue to use Chart B to file. We have plenty of people that will be in the queue. Therefore, only the Chart A final action dates will be used for filing for adjustment of status. And this is pretty typical. Normally, the Chart B is used by USCIS through January, and typically they stop using Chart B and require Chart A to be used for adjustment of status filings in February or March.
Okay. So this is where we're sitting right now, right? It's now the month of June visa bulletin and chart B is not open. We're still
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, and they did actually for February of this year said no more Chart B, only use Chart A. And once they make that announcement, it's applied till the end of the fiscal year. Again, they will announce new application filing dates in the October visa bulletin, and at that point, people could use those dates in Chart B for filing for adjustment of status based on the historical pattern.
Okay, so let's go to our next slide. And now let's talk about June and what happened in the June visa bulletin. So we have the dates from June 2024 to June 2025. So you could see a full year of the movement. And this is rest of world or all chargeability countries. EB1, of course, is still current, which is great. Um, And then EB2, there is still a backlog. We saw some movement, which actually was kind of a nice jump from June to October in EB2. And then EB3, we saw movement about a month from January to February. So any comments on this?
I would say these June, the large movement in both the employment second and third preference categories indicate that the estimates that state was making for number use based on the previous dates proved to be low. Therefore, they needed to increase number use to maximize it under the annual limits. So they made these drastic moves. Uh, the fact that they moved them so much particularly in the second preference, has me a little concerned that if they move them too quickly, they may require corrective action toward the end of the summer. So, for example, if they miscalculated on how many people are going to be using numbers based on the October 15th, 2023 second preference date, if they figured, okay, that's going to result in 5,000 people using numbers in the future, and suddenly they see, okay, we've got 7,000 having used it, they would have to take some corrective action. On the flip side, if they underestimated, people may get lucky and see further movement, but I would not count on that. And again, my concern is that corrective action before September would be required.
And we had a question on the from our listeners about what is EB. So EB means employment base. So we're talking about employment base, first preference, second preference, third preference. And just a recap of the categories: EB1 are those people who have extraordinary ability, outstanding researchers, and are multinational managers and executives. EB2 is what we call second preference, and those are individuals where the position requires at a minimum a master's degree for the position or a bachelor's in 5 years. And this is where you'll find many of our national interest waivers. And then EB3 are individuals who have at least 2 years of work experience education. And this is where you'll find many of our fresh grads with bachelor's degree and people that have a few years of work experience. Now, Charlie, if I am, let's say I'm born in Japan and I'm under EB2, how long do you really think it's going to take for me to get my green card if my employer sponsors me under a perm?
At this point, I would not hazard a guess. If say somebody were just filing now, uh, it's going to be several years, most likely.
So a few years. So unlike EB1, which is why a lot of people want to be in the EB1 category, you just have to get through the USCIS processing times. But under EB2 and EB3, you get through the USCIS processing times, but you have to sit in a queue and wait for your number to be called. So we can go to the next slide. And this breaks it down for China, which Charlie had said before typically has backlogs. So EB1 still has a backlog. They're processing November 2022. And then also for EB2, slight movement. Oh, actually, big movement, couple months. And then November, a few weeks, it jumped for EB3. So any comments here, Charlie?
As I mentioned with the rest of world, my concern is in the second preference is the 2 month movement may require, if they underestimated the number use, that it could require corrective action, especially when we saw the big jump from March to April, and now followed from the May to June jump. Again, I think I may have been a little bit more cautious in the movement. There is so much pending demand in the weekly groupings, and the State Department, in consultation with the USCIS, could have said, okay, here's where I think the date may get by September. Start prepping your cases. And then state could have moved the dates a little bit more slowly to prevent any need for corrective action at the end of the year, and still been able to maximize number use had they needed to move the date more aggressively at the end of the year.
But I think if you just look at analysis, right? So if you're an individual born in China and you're EB2, and if you look at June 2024, they were processing February 1, 2020, and then you fast forward a year in June of 2025, they're now processing December 1, 2020. Charlie, any estimate? Like, what should I tell my foreign national born in China who's under EB2, how long it's gonna take for them to get a green card?
Probably, you know, close to 5 years or so.
Yeah, like around 5 to
Uh,
6 years is usually
yeah,
it.
easily.
Yeah.
And potentially more. Again, now that the annual limit will be slightly lower for fiscal 2026, that could necessarily slow the movement of the dates. I will, it's a little bit in the weeds explanation, but China also benefits from the fact that not all of the China family sponsored numbers are used. So any unused numbers under that limit are can fall down for potential use in the China preferences 1 through 5 with the percentage. So that kind of provides additional numbers in the past, but it's possible that China, if it's family sponsored numbers use could start to increase as well. So there may not be as many fall down numbers.
And then when we talk about corrective action, there was a question about that. I think a good example of that is maybe if you look at the red arrow here for EB3 and you're looking at October 2024, we're moving along. It stayed at September, but then all of a sudden it goes backwards, right, to April 1, 2020. And I think, Charlie, that's what you mean when you say corrective action, right?
Yes, it goes, the date for the new month is earlier than the previous month. And a good example of this is if you think of your household budget and say your employer gives you your paycheck on October 1st and says, here's all the money you have to use for the entire year until I give you your new check the following October. So what you do is you set up a budget of how much you can spend on a monthly basis, October through September, and in that budget, you may have budgeted so you say, okay, I can afford to go out to dinner 2 Saturdays each month. Well, you start getting toward the end of the year and you realize, okay, I overestimated how much money I was going to have for dinners. And so instead of going out, being able to go out for dinner twice, 2 Saturdays a month, I can only go out 1 Saturday a month, no Saturday a month. So that's kind of, when you have to go from 2 Saturdays to one or none, that's an example of how the date is corrective action.
Yeah, so it's like an unexpected expense. You budgeted out your money, then all of a sudden something happens like your water heater breaks or something and you have to replace the water heater and you didn't plan to have to spend an extra, I don't know how much water heaters are, like an extra 2 grand or something. Then all of a sudden you can't buy that coffee and you can't go out to dinner because the money had to go somewhere else. And so it was unplanned and unexpected. So there are like peaks and valleys of demand that happens here with the visa bulletin. And that's why the government has to do corrective action because they had anticipated a certain number used. But then when the numbers actually come in, which will show you, they realize that they actually don't have enough numbers available. We can go to the next slide. And this is about India. And so EB1, again, it's holding steady at February 15, 2022. Also EB2 holding steady January 2013, and then EB3. So no movement for India in the employment-based category. So any comments, Charlie, you want to make here?
No, the one hope for employment first, there might be some room for movement, slight movement in the month of September if they need to use up the remaining numbers. Uh, but they may very well hold the second and third dates as we go forward, or possibly move them at the end of the year in either August or September if they need to make a move so that they can maximize numbers. But again, because both China and India, second and third, and to some extent first, are limited to the per country limit, it makes movements much harder.
Okay. And then if I am born in India and I'm under the EB3, how long is your prediction that it'll take for me to get my green card?
I would not even hazard a guess. Uh, I
Well, he
mean,
would say at least probably over 10 years is
over 10,
yeah.
yeah, 10 years. Again, it's going, as we saw in that earlier example chart, the amount of demand. versus the limit. It's just going to be longer. And I believe, these both the India and China wait times in employment second and third, and to some extent first, are going to continue to lengthen as long as there are final action dates in the rest of world employment second and third preference categories. Because in the past, if the rest of world applicants were not using all of the numbers available to them, then those quote otherwise unused numbers could be made available to either India or China based on the priority dates, with the earliest priority dates, which are typically India, receiving the bulk of those unused numbers.
Yeah, what we're seeing live on the ground is usually about 10 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah, unfortunately. If we go to the next slide. So, Charlie, how are green card approvals being impacted by all of this?
As I mentioned earlier, that the State Department is needing to make corrective action based on whether their previous estimates of number use were high or low. And this will continue to impact green card approvals through the summer. So, unfortunately, I wish I had better news. But again, the summer months, July through September, are typically slower movement of the dates, with hopefully more movement being available in October, the beginning of the new fiscal year, when there is the brand new supply of numbers under the fiscal 2026 annual limit.
Yeah. If we go to the next slide, this is Charlie's predictions for what we're going to see in the coming months through September 2025. So, Charlie, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, these were basically, throughout the course of the year, things would average. For example, on average, India employment first would move ahead up to 1 week per month. In the second preference, up to 2 weeks, third, up to 2 weeks, China, similar movements. And these are over the course of the year. Sometimes the date would hold for, say, 2 months and then advance by, say, 2 weeks. So these are averages. Uh, these movements should not be expected July through September, as we're winding down the year. These were just averages for the entire fiscal year.
And then someone had asked a question, if there's not enough for USCIS to allow filing dates, why doesn't Department of State still compute a later filing date?
This State Department will establish the application filing dates. Typically, that's done in the beginning of the year in October, and those dates are established in consultation with USCIS in an attempt to generate enough applicant demand to maximize number use under that year's annual limits. But typically, they will not retrogress the dates. Once they're announced, they'll tend to hold them. I don't know if that will happen in certain categories as we enter fiscal 2026. But again, and also the State Department will apply the Chart B dates to notifying applicants who are processing overseas throughout the whole fiscal year, whereas Immigration Service will only allow them to be used typically for, you know, 4 to 6 months.
Yeah. So, the Department of State usually has a date because they have to prep them and get them ready for interview because it has to go through the National Visa Center. So that's why the dates actually are still being used by the Department of State, but the USCIS actually stops using them.
And
Right.
to be perfectly honest, when you see the dates in terms of State Department, they would have notified all of the eligible applicants based on the announcement of the date. So it really, for State Department, they've already notified all those people that were eligible to say, here's, you need to start submitting documents. Here are the 5 or 6 documents you need to submit to us. So once they're announced, it doesn't make any sense really for the State Department to stop using them.
Yeah, so just for, the listeners, when you consular process, you still have to go through the National Visa Center, and that's the holding center, and you have to prepare a lot of documents, so usually it takes a few months just for the National Visa Center to review the documents, make sure everything looks good, you have your police clearances, you have everything, and then they will send the case once it's documentarily qualified. to the consulate or to the embassy for scheduling. So that's why they need a little bit more lead time because they have to get everything prepped and ready. And so that's why they continue to use Chart B. Um, and then we had one question here about, is the 10 years wait for China, India after submitting a green card application? China, we're not predicting that it's real live. It's not 10 years for China. We're saying more along the lines of 5 years. And that's from when you establish your priority date, right? So that's when either your I-140 is filed, if you're under EB-1 or EB-2 national interest waiver, or when your perm application is filed. Then that is your priority date. So we're saying that typically what we're seeing is about 5 years for people born in China. And then if you're born in India, we're looking at more along the lines of 10 years. But of course, that can change based on the visa bulletin movement. So that's why you should stay tuned and listen to us every month. We can go to the next slide. And so, Charlie, can you walk us through this example of what happens when the USCIS requests a visa number?
Sure. This is a procedure that I established way back in fiscal 2000. It was rolled in out to everybody for immigration in 2001. And what happens is the adjudicating officers at each USCIS office can log in to the State Department system. So I'm interviewing Charina. I'm in New York, so I sign into my computer. Based on my login, it shows that I'm in New York. My name is Alfred Newman. Charina is born in India. She's an employment third preference skilled worker. Her priority date is January 23rd of 2013, and they have to also enter her A number. And we required them to enter the A number 2 times so that there weren't any typos, because all of this information is, like I said, it is entered into the computer when they finish the interview and determined that Charina was eligible. And then what they do is they press a button on the keyboard, they hit enter, and that information is instantaneously transmitted to the State Department's computer system. And if we go to the next slide, they would get an instantaneous response saying that the granting authority at the State Department is Sally Sue. It used to list my name. The requesting status, it is approved, because when it hit the State Department system, they would have said, okay, the country of chargeability is India. The priority date is January 23rd of 2013. That is earlier than the established India third preference date. And the A number has not been processed previously. So they would immediately authorize the request. The Alfred Newman could print out this message. They would place it in Charina's case file and ship her case file off to the green card processing facility. And then her adjustment would have been completed.
Next slide.
Now, if when they press the button, Charina's priority date was no longer eligible, say that she had filed or, they had started processing the case several months earlier, and by the time they had everything ready to go, the India third preference date had retrogressed. It had moved back to, say, January 1st of 2013. So Charina's priority date is no longer eligible. So they would have gotten this response saying it is pending. The State Department would have held the information on Charina's A number in their system. And then whenever the India third preference date advanced beyond her priority date, then the requesting Alfred Newman would receive a response saying, Charina's case is now eligible for processing. And you can, here's the authorization. But again, this request would have been held.
So it just sits in the queue.
It sets in the queue. But the beauty of this is it provides the State Department with visibility, because they see that, okay, we've got at least one person with a January 1st of 2023 priority date. Therefore, if we move the date to February 1st of 2013, we're going to have to give out one number. And that type of visibility is very important, because we're looking at all the Charinas that have priority dates earlier so that when they say, okay, we want for the next month, we want to use 500 numbers, then they just have to go down their list of pending cases and go down to the 501st priority date, and that would become the new final action date for India third preference.
Yeah, and if you just kinda tie it all together, when Charlie said the per country limit, 3,003, and if it's me and my spouse and my child and that's 3, then it would go down to 3,000 and they just keep going down till they get to 0, right? Yeah. We can go to the next slide. Okay, Charlie, what trends should global mobility leaders be tracking based on all our discussions today?
Should start the green card process as quickly as possible. Timeliness is the leader's friend. Uh, do not, if anybody has an appointment scheduled, this would be primarily at overseas posts, but if you have something scheduled in the US, do not reschedule your appointment if unless it is absolutely necessary, because you never know that, say I had an appointment for tomorrow, and that when I got that appointment notice, it was not convenient for me. Or I had, so I rescheduled for a June or July appointment. By doing so, had I kept my May appointment, I could have received my visa or my adjustment of status could have been finalized. But by changing my appointment to June or July, the final action date may have retrogressed and I'm no longer eligible for final processing. So try not to reschedule, try to appear for your original interview, uh, and supply any requested documentation as quickly as possible. Monitor if you have children, monitor the children's ages to compare when they're likely to turn 21 versus when they're likely to be processed. So you can kind of stay ahead of the game. And again, just monitor and stay in touch with whoever is responsible for processing your case and always ask questions if you do not understand something.
Yeah, and if we go to the next slide, so we pride ourselves in a lot of our forecasting and predictive modeling. So the cool thing about what we do at WR is because we have Charlie, we know that October will likely move. We have some predictions of what date will it likely move to, so we can actually be more proactive than reactive and start getting ready. So we know which employees will likely be current, and we can start moving on their green card applications. Um, we can go to the next slide. And then this is just a sample budgeting report so we can help our clients budget based on what the predictions are of Charlie. So if you're interested in that feature, then please do reach out to us. We have some questions. We've answered quite a number of them during the webinar, but let's answer some of these. With the recent mid-quarter progression, can we still anticipate movement next month?
I would say no, and then you can be pleasantly surprised if the dates were to advance. So again, I would assume no movement in the July through September dates. Be pleasantly surprised if they do. But again, I have to stress process when you're scheduled and complete your processing as quickly as possible so you don't get caught up in any corrective action at the end of a fiscal year.
Yeah. And then, what would be the impact for TN to green card? I think the question here is whether you can start a green card process while you're on a TN. The reason being because a TN has a single intent visa, meaning that you have to maintain an intention to return back to your home country. I know in the past I've talked to many employers who have been really, really conservative in their stance and saying, no, you must switch someone from TN to H-1B to green card. But practicality, it's not really there in terms of how long it takes in terms of getting a H-1B visa number under the lottery. And so what we always tell our clients who are in TN, we have really long discussions with them, making sure that the intent is documented, that they do plan to return home. They continue to have strong ties as we go through that green card process. We also work with them through any travel plans they have to make sure that they'll be able to continue to travel while they're pursuing their green card. The next question is applying now for a green card a bad time by bringing extreme scrutiny more than usual? Would it be better to wait? Any comments there, Charlie, on that?
I, you know, we're in strange times now, but in the past, I have always advised people to act in a very timely manner. You want to be at the front of any lines, if at all possible. Uh, and again, uh, delaying often puts you at risk for
Yeah,
future visa availability.
Yeah, I think that right now, just to give you some sample processing times, if you're sponsoring an employee under perm, if I were to file the perm today, it's taking the government 16 months to review that perm, where historically it had been 6 months. And you have to understand that the Department of Labor is not a funded program. And so staffing wise, they're really limited. Unlike USCIS, where you can pay them 2805 for premium processing. With Department of Labor, there's nothing like that. They're staffed at where they are, and I have been practicing over 25 years. So I have seen processing times that go up to more than a year, sometimes 2 years. So unfortunately, right now we're in that time. So it is really important that you start the green card process for any employees as soon as you're able to do so. Because unfortunately, we're just going to have to continue to wait. And the sooner you get them into the queue, the sooner they can lock down a priority date. So even if it takes the Department of Labor 18 months to process. At the end of the day, they will have a date starting today that locks in their priority date. And then even if it takes 5 years, at least even though it took 18 months for the government to process it, they're still sitting in that queue waiting for their number to be called. How can we understand the additional compliance requirements for organizations with a percentage of their workforce on temporary visas? I think it's really important that if you do have a workforce that is on visas, that you reach out to your counsel and make sure that you have all your compliance documentation ready. The government is doing inspections and they are coming for H-1Bs. They are coming to interview the HR, the employee, the manager to make sure that the individual is being paid and is doing exactly what is listed on the H-1B petition. We are also seeing more I-9 worksite verification audits, making sure that that the paperwork has been completed properly. You will also see more of an integration with Social Security and the Department of Homeland Security. And then also the agencies are now talking to each other. So including the IRS, so the Internal Revenue Service, Social Security Office, Department of Homeland Security. And then most recently, I think a lot of planning is very important. We just got word yesterday that they are going to suspend visa appointments for F1 and J1 students and interns or scholars. So it's really important that a lot of planning be put in place and just making sure you're buttoned up and you have all your documentation ready in the event they do ask for some information. We have a couple of questions. Charlie, someone was asking if the wait times for Mexico are similar to rest of world. Is it still the same for EB 1, 2, 3?
The wait times, yes, because Mexico is in the employment categories 1 through 3 are subject to the same dates as rest of world. So
Okay.
same processing times.
Okay. And then someone had asked any increases. I think this is in RFEs, request for evidence. We are monitoring it to see how more RFEs we're receiving. We have seen an uptick in requests for evidence where the government's asking for additional documents. Not really in the green card process, because once you hit this last stage, you've pretty much submitted everything you can, but what we have seen are RFEs for biometrics, making sure that people have actually, if they have any sort of criminal history, even if it's a speeding ticket we've seen, they are asking that the individual be fingerprinted and go in for biometrics. So we're seeing an uptick of those. We were really worried and cautious. But the individuals that we've had who've gone in, they just took their fingerprints and then they were fine. So I think what the government's probably doing is just verifying that they have all the information about individuals. For the F1 students and the J1s, they actually are checking social media accounts and checking and ensuring that that is there are no issues there. So I think it just have to be. It's a very cautious world right now that we live in, especially if you are here as a non-immigrant. And with that, we're going to end our session. Again, thank you for joining us. We're going to move these to a quarterly webinar. You're more than welcome to follow us on LinkedIn. Also, check our website. We also have this and our prior webinars on YouTube. And with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Charlie, any parting words?
No, just stay tuned for our broadcast once the July visa bulletin is announced. We'll provide you updates on what's happening there.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.